Wagner Group's Figrogynes rejoins Belarus. The Belarusian president said on Thursday that the mercenary leader who led a brief uprising against the Kremlin is now in Russia, and his troops are in the camps, raising concerns especially over President Vladimir Putin's commitment to ending the campaign for his new regime. The allegations of Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko could not be personally verified, and the Kremlin refused to comment on the whereabouts of Yevgeny Prigozhin. However, Russian media reported that he was recently seen in his office in St. Petersburg. It is unclear whether Prigozhin's presence in Russia would violate the agreement that allowed the Wagner Group commander to move to Belarus, in exchange for the end of the offensive and a promise of amnesty for himself and his army. But reports suggest the deal would allow him to continue his work in Russia. If true, it may indicate that the threat from Prigozhin has not been fully resolved and that the Kremlin is watching him carefully until he decides what to do with the fat boys who might be loyal to him. Putin said Wagner's troops could join the Russian army, retire, or move to Belarus. But much of the deal Lukashenko brokered remains unclear. Last week, Lukashenko said that the leader of the mercenary was in Belarus, but on Thursday he told international journalists that Prigozhin was in St. Also, Saint with Wagner's army in their camp, he could go to Petersburg if he wanted to. He did not specify the location of the camp, but Prigozhin's mercenaries were fighting the Russian army in eastern Ukraine, as well as on Russian soil, before the revolt. He said that the money and weapons seized by the Russian police were also returned to Prigozhin. Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, when asked about Prigozhin's whereabouts, shrugged and said the Kremlin had no desire or opportunity to track Prigozhin's whereabouts, but reiterated that the deal was done because the opposition thought he had moved to Belarus. Lukashenko said that his government has given the use of the Belarusian barracks to the Wagner Company, which sends troops around the world to fight for Russia's interests, but the company has not yet made a final decision. The Kremlin blamed Prigozhin's escape from punishment for his reform, while others who criticized Putin were sentenced to heavy prison terms, exile, and even fines. The Belarusian leader denied allegations that Putin would order Prigozhin's death, saying, "If you think Putin is cruel, if he wanted to kill him, no, that wouldn't happen." On Wednesday, Russian online newspapers Fontanka and Izvestia published videos and photos showing the cash and gold holdings of Prigozhin's largest house in Russia's second-largest city. The photos appear to be part of an effort by the authorities to discredit Prigozhin, who, despite his financial ties to Putin, sees himself as an enemy of the corrupt elite. A painting hanging in the main hall shows a row of decapitated heads. A large commemorative sledgehammer that reads, "For important discussions," can also be seen in the photo release. The sledgehammer became Wagner's symbol after it was reported that Wagner's soldiers used it to kill opponents. Russian media released a series of selfies showing Wagner wearing various wigs, false beards, and a foreign outfit, apparently reflecting his deployments in Syria and many African countries. When asked whether Prigozhin and his messengers would finally move to Belarus, Lukashenko evasively replied that the decision would rest with President Wagner and the Russian government. The Belarusian leader said that he does not believe that the presence of mercenaries in his country will destabilize the country, and that all Wagner forces should sign the agreement with the Belarusian authorities, explaining the terms and limits of their work. But Belarusian political analyst Valery Karbalevich believes Lukashenko may be offended by Wagner's presence on his court. Once the model betrays its owner, he can do it again and return to Minsk instead of Moscow, Karbalevich said. Region prior to their invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Moscow also maintains a military presence in Belarus. During the brief insurgency, Prigozhin's mercenaries quickly swept the southern Russian city of Rostov-on-Don and captured military headquarters there, before moving within 200 kilometers, 125 miles, of the Russian capital. Prigozhin, longtime enemies Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of Staff General Valery Gerasimov, criticizing his attitude towards Ukraine. Wagner warriors met little resistance, sometimes breaking through barriers. They also shot down at least 6 helicopters and commando planes, killing at least 10 pilots. After the agreement was reached, President Wagner ordered his troops to return to the camp. The failed coup is the biggest threat Putin has faced in more than 2 decades in power, exposing his weakness and undermining the Kremlin's authority. It is unclear whether Shoigu and Gerasimov, who disappeared during the coup, retained Putin's support, but they have now held their positions. Lukashenko said that he warned Prigozhin that if they do not soon come to an agreement to end the fighting, he and his army will be destroyed and Belarus will send an army to defend Moscow. It is necessary to put it in flour. As history shows, it is very dangerous, said Lukashenko. To a question about Russia's deployment of nuclear weapons in Belarus, Lukashenko replied that the weapons were aimed at preventing terrorism against the country. Both Putin and Lukashenko said some of the planes were sent to Belarus, and the Belarusian leader reiterated on Thursday that some of the planes were flown to Belarus, while others are expected to be delivered by the end of the year. Lukashenko added that Russia will consult him on the use of weapons, adding that he can only respond to NATO aggression against Russia or Belarus. The Belarusian leader noted that these weapons are strictly for protection. He continued, "Do not touch us, we will not use these deadly weapons." Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko confirmed that the leader of the Wagner paramilitary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has arrived in the country. What's next? Lukashenko said there was a deal that narrowly prevented Wagnerian mercenaries from marching on Moscow after the private army targeted Russian military leaders, the rebellion, who were aware of the death danger. I know the work of Minister Sergei Shoigu and Prigozhin. Shoigu, who went to war. He was criticized unjustly from time to time, he said. He also said that we should learn from the events of the uprising. He said that we should respond to his demands in a timely manner. Putin's supporters say that his regime has been weakened by the opposition. Asked whether Wagner's rebel forces had weakened Putin's power by building a military base, marching through Moscow and shooting down military planes along the way, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov accused commentators of lying and added, "We disagree." Putin himself tried to paint. The weekend was cited as a victory for the Russian army. Putin, by Wagner, to the soldiers of the Ministry of Defense, National Guard, FSB Security Service, and Ministry of Internal Affairs, who gathered in the Kremlin courtyard to pay a minute's silence for the pilot. You stopped the plane. War. The head of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, returned to Russia almost 2 weeks after the failed coup of the mercenary group against Russia's military leaders. That's all, according to the Belarusian leader, who negotiated the end of last month's struggle with the Kremlin by offering to keep the exiled Prigozhin and his Wagnerian mercenaries. We invited Charles Maines of NPR to Moscow to find out what happened to Prigozhin and what it means for Wagner's future. Good day, Charles. Charles Mainz Online. Hello, Scott. Detroit, true story spin on a story full of story surprises. But I mean, let's say again that information about Prigozhin was returned to Russia by Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. What did Lukashenko say about this? Maines, yes. You know, just support and remind everyone that Prigozhin launched this offensive, captured a large Russian city and marched on the outskirts of Moscow. The fight ended when Lukashenko came to a compromise. Prigozhin was to withdraw his troops from Belarus in exchange for exile and amnesty. The problem now is that no one has seen Prigozhin since then. Suppose it is highly likely to be in Belarus. But at a press conference today in Minsk, Belarus, Lukashenko said that was not the case. Audio clip of archived recording? Chairman Alexander Lukashenko, not in English. Maines, here Lukashenko casually says, according to Prigozhin, that he now lives in St. In other words, in Russia, not in Belarus. Now, a Kremlin spokesperson, when asked, says the government does not have the ability or desire to follow Prigozhin's every move. All this seems to have raised doubts about the terms of the amnesty which began to end the struggle. Detroit, well, considering the latest drama, what about Prigozhin? How does Russia describe the attack? Maines, President Vladimir Putin did not see this attack as an expression of war, quite the opposite. He believes he has failed because both the community and security forces fought Wagner against the government. Putin delivered this message of unity, you know, together we saved the country from chaos and war. Now Putin has also begun to say that Wagner has been receiving money from the state from the very beginning, arguing that financial crimes deserve investigation. By the way, we see with pleasure that the state media reported that the police had fired at Prigozhin's palatial beautiful house. Investigators said they found large amounts of cash, gold and weapons. They have Prigozhin's swim.